Okay, let's dive into this. We're living in a time where the lines between good and evil feel, well, they feel like they're constantly shifting under our feet. It seems like telling the heroes from the villains has become almost impossible. I mean, really think about it for a second. We see conflicts everywhere, and you'll almost always hear both sides claiming they're the ones on the right side of history. It's incredibly confusing, right? So, what is actually going on here? The source material we're exploring today brings up this really fascinating and kind of troubling idea. It suggests that someone could be a celebrated prime minister or a journalist famous for exposing evil, but from a certain spiritual perspective, still be fundamentally on the wrong path. The point is, what looks good on the surface might not be the whole story. So, what we're going to do is unpack one specific philosophical argument for why we're in this moral mess. And just to be clear, this isn't about taking political sides, it's about taking a much deeper look at the very foundation of how we decide what's right and what's wrong in the first place. And this whole argument kicks off with a pretty bold claim that as a whole, humanity has lost its true north, what this viewpoint calls a divine compass. So here's the absolute core of the problem, according to this perspective. The root of all our confusion is that humanity stopped measuring good and evil against a higher, divine standard, the will of God or Buddha. And instead, we started using our own flawed, human-made yardstick. We're basing everything on our own shifting laws, our politics, and whatever the latest trends are. And you can really see the two sides of the coin here. On one side, you've got human judgment. It's based on earthly stuff, it changes with the political winds, and it's inherently flawed. But on the other side, you have what's called divine judgment, presented here as unchanging, constant, and ultimately correct. The whole argument is that when you ditch that fixed point on the right, the compass on the left just spins and spins, and we all get lost.
And this quote, wow, it just perfectly captures the consequence of all this. When you have two sides and both of them are working from their own flawed, human-centered rulebook, you don't get a clean fight between good and evil. Nope, you get something way murkier. You get a conflict where both sides might be fundamentally in the wrong, even while they're both totally convinced they're the good guys.
Okay, so where does all this lead? I mean, what actually happens when we build entire systems of government on this kind of shaky moral ground? Well, according to this viewpoint, no political system is automatically safe. In a democracy, if the majority of people don't have that moral anchor and they just vote for whatever benefits them personally, they can literally create a kind of hell through majority rule. But then in an autocracy, you've got the flip side of the coin. One single leader's will is everything. And if that leader isn't aligned with some higher good, they basically become a god, creating a totally different kind of hell. It's like two different roads leading to the same scary destination. And this isn't just some abstract theory. The source points to real-world examples. Think about places like China or North Korea, where one person's ideology becomes the absolute truth for millions. Or Myanmar, where the military leadership is put on a pedestal totally beyond criticism. Even in a place like Thailand, you can be arrested for criticizing the state, even if you said it in a totally different country. This, the argument goes, is what happens when human power just decides it gets to set its own absolute rules. So let's peel back the layers and look at the most extreme version of this system failure. The source gives us a chillingly clear breakdown of what it calls tyranny or totalitarianism. You can almost think of it as a playbook. First, violence isn't the last resort, it's just a normal tool of governing. Second, secret police and constant surveillance become the norm to keep everyone in line. Third, concentration camps pop up to get rid of anyone who dares to disagree. And finally, and this is the absolute key, the survival of the state itself becomes the ultimate good. The system is more important than the actual human beings living in it. Now get this, because it's a really chilling insight. You would think that after a totalitarian state crushes an enemy, there would be peace, right? But this argument says the exact opposite. For these systems, peace is actually a threat. They need an enemy to justify their existence. So the moment they defeat one opponent, they have to invent a new one. The war never, ever ends, because the war itself is the whole point. So what's the ultimate warning here? What's the deep-seated human emotion that drives this whole destructive cycle? To understand that, let's look at the case of Hong Kong as it's presented in the source. For decades, Hong Kong was this just shining example of success. It's a tiny place that became one of the world's biggest financial powerhouses. So what was the secret sauce? Well, the viewpoint here is crystal clear. It was freedom. Economic freedom, personal freedom, that was the engine that made it all work. But then, a completely different system of control began to move in, one designed to bring Hong Kong under the mainland's thumb. And the result, according to this perspective, well, it was chaos, oppression, and the slow motion decay of the very freedom that had made the city so successful in the first place. And this quote gets to the absolute core of the diagnosis from this source. It argues that the ideology behind this kind of state control isn't really about creating a better world for everyone. It's driven by a much more basic human emotion: envy. It's the impulse to tear down other people's success because that success is a direct threat to your own power. And as the quote says, you simply can't build a utopia on a foundation like that. So the final takeaway from this entire analysis is a pretty challenging one. It suggests that when a government's main job becomes smashing down success and crushing freedom just to hold on to its own power, well, then standing up to that system isn't just a political choice. It becomes a moral imperative. Which leaves us with this final massive question. The perspective we've walked through presents a really stark choice. Either we rely on our own flawed, shifting human standards, or we seek a higher, divine one. But in a world with so many different beliefs, what could that higher standard even look like? And how could we ever possibly agree on it? It's a question that really gets to the very heart of our modern moral crisis.